Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody. Episode 4, Bob Ruff. Here you go.
Right. Finally, the higher court orders the city of West Memphis to respond to the request. They finally do, and they give them the evidence log, and there's all the evidence. And then finally, in December this year, or this past December, a couple months ago, the city attorney for West Memphis invited Damien's attorneys into the evidence room at the West Memphis Police Department. Lo and behold, there is every piece of evidence, as he put it, neatly organized and cataloged in the evidence room where it's been the whole time. They were straight up lying about it being gone all that time. Physically saw the ligatures, which is what we want to test. We saw that we confirmed that they are there. They are still tied. They're intact. They're preserved. So then it's back to the DA or the prosecuting attorney. Okay, now the evidence is here. Why don't you file the, do this joint motion to test the evidence, since you said you would. And he says, no, you have to file it with the court. And where we stand right now is Damien's defense has filed a motion with the court to use the MVAC extraction method to do DNA testing on the ligatures in evidence. And Cressman now has probably about 10-15 days left to respond. We don't know if he's going to respond and try to fight it, or if he's going to, respond and say, fine, I agree, and let's go ahead and test it. So that's where we stand right now.
What a jacked up case.
Mm-hmm.
What would they possibly gain? I mean, even if this case were to say the audience, or not the audience, but the public bought the story that the evidence was destroyed, at some junction, the truth has, and this is an interesting thing that I've found, is that ultimately truth will always come to light. It's like it wants to. It's like it's there. It hates being suppressed, and the truth wants to come through. And the lies, even multiple layers of lies, eventually will fade away, because the people that are supporting the lies will eventually fade away, and the truth will come out. At some junction, somebody would have found that evidence and going, holy crap, here it is. I found it. And, even if it was a evidence clerk 10 years from now, they would have, when, the current police chief and everybody else that had put out, whatever press and whatever stories they had put out, they had gone away. There's it's almost like a witness that shortly after the crime still has a relationship with the suspect, and so doesn't want to say anything. But 10 years later, when they've broke up, and then the witness will come forward and the case will get solved. Well, eventually this evidence would have come out. What could they have possibly gained by suppressing it?
I don't really know. There's nothing that's worth what they're doing, trying to hide the truth. There are theories that they're just trying to avoid a lawsuit. If Damien, Jason, and Jesse if their names are cleared and it's proven that they were innocent, then they would possibly be opened up to having to pay the state of Arkansas to having to pay a big settlement. There's what we often see is there's like this legacy system that happens in these district attorney and police offices and police departments, where everybody's trying to protect the legacy of the people that came before them. So because you're right, it doesn't make sense. Keith Cressman was not a prosecutor in 1993. He wasn't even around in 2011 when the Alford plea was put into place. He's got no dog in this fight whatsoever. But for some reason, probably the most egregious of anyone, just straight up lied and said evidence wasn't there that they knew was there. And that was the whole time. I was telling Damien, because he was obviously pissed when they said the evidence was gone. I told him when they first said it, it's not gone. We have the emails from Ellington saying that he's got people packaging it. How could it have been gone 15 years ago? And so it was, well, were they lying then or are they lying now? It turns out they're lying. They're lying now. Well, maybe both, but yeah, I don't know. There's no excuse for it. And I can't put a logical reason as to why. I mean, all I can think of is by saying that the evidence was lost, that there's a possibility that either Cressman or the police chief or whoever truly thinks that Damien might be guilty, and that maybe this is just posturing, right? Because I've heard theories as a group that, you know, anyone who thinks that the West Memphis Three are guilty, they call them the nons. I don't mean to be disparaging in saying that, but there were supporters and non-supporters, and so the non-group have had this theory that that the whole idea of testing the evidence is a publicity stunt, that Damien doesn't really want to test the evidence, that he's just trying to, I don't know, garner support on the internet. Or there's even people who said that, well, I bullied him into it. I came along and boxed him into a corner where they had no choice. But and so all I can think of is that maybe Cressman or somebody at the police department actually believed that ridiculous narrative, and they thought, well, look, here's the way everybody saves face. We say the evidence is lost. Damien obviously doesn't really want to test the evidence, so he'll just be like, oh, it's lost, and we just move on, and it finally ends this discussion. But they, you know, Damien called their bluff because it wasn't a media stunt. I didn't bully him into anything. Damien wants his name cleared, and he believes in your technology. He believes that's what's going to finally find the truth. He's not, and people should consider this. The guy that they convicted and sentenced to death for this murder has been informed that there's a technology that can pull out, you know, multiple times more DNA out of this evidence than any other method used before. Essentially, if his DNA is on that crime scene, they're going to find it. And he's the one that is screaming and fighting to test the DNA. And it's the prosecutors who supposedly believe that he's guilty that are fighting it, so much so that they're lying about even having the evidence anymore. I mean, you know, go back to all the scenarios we were talking about before. It's Occam's razor. What seems like the most obvious? Does it seem like Damien's a guilty guy trying to use his MVAC testing? Or does it seem like the prosecutor actually believes that he's guilty? Because all it would take is one. Damien's never been to those woods. He's never been around those boys. If they find one of his skin cells in one of those pieces of evidence, it's game over for him. Any public support he's ever had is gone. Anything he makes his living on Patreon as a content creator, that's gone. Everything's gone.
Well, he goes back to prison.
Well, he won't go back to prison because he's already convicted and sentenced. So he's not at risk of going back to prison. It would just basically prove that all these years and all these millions of dollars people have raised to help him were for nothing because he's actually guilty. So that's what he's risking by doing this DNA testing. One skin cell would do that to him.
Take more than one, but 10 at the most.
Whatever. Yeah, whatever it takes to get a DNA profile. Yeah. That's all it would take.
But say 10, 10 intact skin cells, he's done. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting. And you would also think that, like, the prosecuting attorney would say, you know what? I want to prove that my predecessor was correct, and that he correctly prosecuted these guys, and they were the ones that did it. And it's not like it's a huge expense. You know,
we're paying for it.
Oh, well, then
the prosecutor doesn't even have to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah.
By the way, we could use a discount on that. I'll talk to you about that.
Oh, right on. Yeah. Well, I can assure you the discount on my side will not make much of a difference. Yeah. But anyway, again, if all the sides are pursuing the truth and they keep the victims in mind, and in this case, it's interesting. The West Memphis Three, to me, when I look at the West Memphis Three, there's two sets of three. There's the three original, the little boys that were killed. And, you know, we can't forget that assuming that the three men that were actually convicted of this crime, then later released, didn't do it, that means there's still a murderer out there.
Right.
Somebody capable of killing three little boys, stripping them of their clothes, tying them up with shoelaces, stuffing them into a creek, hiding their clothes by stuffing those with a stick. Somebody capable of doing that is still out there.
And then further capable of letting three more children go to prison for the rest of their lives for the crime they committed.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
The
that's a monster. This
the
is
level of evil that dude has. So as part of my podcast, I went through and actually kind of laid things out. I call it the three levels of evil.
Mhm.
And somebody capable of doing that is way up there. I mean, that's hard to comprehend.
I said it on the podcast that this case went wrong because the police were looking for a monster. They were looking for a boogeyman. When they pulled those bodies out of that creek, they saw the injuries and they thought there was this big bad boogeyman monster out there that did this satanic cult, ritualistic, all that. But the reality is what we just described, that's the monster. The
Yeah.
monster doesn't have to look the way you think that the monster looks. The monster is very likely someone with a close known personal relationship to at least one of those boys.
And is scared enough that understands, it's I've seen a number of confessions and things like that the guy that did it, and rape followed by a murder is really typical of this, where the lust and the desire and just the overwhelming urge and impulse and everything that especially that men have sometimes to accomplish that release, that once that happens, they then come to their senses and they realize what they've done. And this actually, there was another case that the MVAC helped solve, and they got this kind of confession from this guy. Sharon Scholmeyers was the victim's name up in Salt Lake City, if you want to look it up. But in his confession, that's kind of what he said, was that once he finished and the rape had occurred, he came to his senses. He said, this girl has seen me. She knows who I am. I have to kill her, because if I don't, I'm done. And so he had to kill her and then kind of stage her body in a way that nobody would supposedly suspect him. And amazingly, he was the apartment manager where she lived, and he actually let her mom into the apartment the next morning to let the victim's mom find her daughter, naked and tied up in the bathtub. And so, I don't think some of these monsters start out that way, but everything kind of builds on itself. And these guys go from making a massive mistake to becoming a monster. And like you said in the docuseries, I think that's kind of what happened as well.
My personal theory on the case is that one of the boys were murdered out of anger, out of a loss of temper. I don't think it was some premeditated thing. And then the offender was then left with two witnesses. And so but even still, like, you're right, things escalate, but there's something inside you that's just awful. They can look at that, and because essentially this is the decision they're making. Now I have to kill them because they've seen me. But the decision they're making is, I don't want to lose my life, so I'm going to take yours instead. And in this case, it was to take two more 8-year-old innocent boys' lives to trade it for themselves. So it's an escalation that was probably never intended, but that, in my opinion, that monster was always in there. Has to be.
Oh, sure.
And I'm not a psychologist, but there's a certain, because you also see crimes where something like this happens, and then the person, when they kind of say come to their senses, even in a murder, and they break down and they confess, they call the police on themselves. You see people, where situations like this have happened before. But it's really something else to decide. Not only was the first person's life more important than yours, that might have been a fit of rage, and you can, maybe you were out of your mind and didn't realize what you were doing, and you wouldn't have done it in your right mind. But then you make a conscious logical decision to take more life. That's a monster.
Oh yeah. And I'm not, oh my gosh. It is really hard, I think, for the vast majority of society to even comprehend that. And I've also kind of explored the Lord of the Flies and kind of the whole, mindset behind that. And, many of us, there's an evil lurking in many of us. And I think that there's a few things in life that, there's a number of most things in life, especially, being raised by parents and having to believe in God and, all these different things that would allow us and prevent us from ever allowing that monster to come out. But it's in there. And for a lot of people, it's in there a lot stronger and a lot deeper than others. And if they ever allow themselves to get into a scenario like this, and who knows, maybe the guy was drunk, maybe he had some chemicals in him. But regardless, that doesn't matter. The fact is, like you said, this guy most likely did something out of rage, and then, rather than stopping at that moment, and that was a decision tree right there, at that junction, he decided he was going to take two other innocent lives of an 8-year-old. Like I have 3 boys, and the twins just turned, or they're about to turn 12, and the youngest is 10. And so 8-year-old boys is very, very real in my life right now. And the thought of what it would take to kill even one of them, or be so mad that I would do something, to even harm one of those boys, to me just doesn't even register. And I think for the 99.9% of all men out there, that's probably where they are as well. But that 1%, the ones that just don't have the personal discipline, it's possible.
Yeah, well, thankfully you've made some technology that can catch some of those guys now. Yeah,
and we are. And and thankfully there's guys like you out there that can dig deep enough into some of these cases and bring up things that nobody ever looked at. So, hey, I know you're headed off to another appointment. So this has been a fantastic discussion, man. I sure appreciate you coming on.
No, I appreciate you having me, and really congratulations on the work you've done with MBAC, and hopefully we'll be connecting soon on the West Memphis 3 case.
Absolutely. Hey, before we go, why don't you tell everybody how they can listen to your podcast and get a hold of you?
Yeah, so it's just, if you just look on anywhere you get your podcast, Truth and Justice. There's, right now we're between seasons, so we're just doing bonus episodes. We had Jared on a couple of weeks ago, just doing case relevant interviews while we're prepping for our next season. And then each season is its own case. If you're interested in the West Memphis 3 season, that's season 5. You can get that anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Google, wherever. True Crime Binge is the same, like conversational with different true crime podcasters. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. And the Forgotten West Memphis 3, you can check out. If it's not running right now on Oxygen, I think now you can get it on Amazon. It's a 4-hour, 4-part docuseries.
And it is absolutely well worth watching. So, hey, thanks again, Bob. It has been fantastic, and hope you have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. hit subscribe, and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.